Before diving into our exploration of consciousness across traditions, let me share what awaits you on this profound journey. Throughout history, mystics and spiritual seekers have created intricate maps of consciousness, navigational tools for the inner realms that exist beyond ordinary awareness. Today, we'll discover how these seemingly disparate systems, from Kabbalah to Buddhism to Hermeticism to Shamanism, may actually be describing the same experiential territories using different symbolic languages. By the end of our journey, you'll possess a comprehensive metamap for understanding your own inner experiences and states of consciousness that transcend everyday awareness. What if I told you that the map of your mind, the very landscape of your consciousness, was charted thousands of years ago? That ancient traditions across the globe, separated by vast distances and cultures, somehow arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about the territory of human consciousness. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the space of awareness within which all your thoughts and sensations arise. This seemingly simple space, this field of consciousness, is actually a vast, multi-dimensional realm with distinct territories, landmarks, and boundaries that mystics have been mapping for millennia. Soul traveler, you have likely felt it before, those moments when your consciousness shifts, when perception alters, when reality seems to breathe with a deeper meaning that ordinary language struggles to capture. Perhaps during deep meditation, or in a moment of profound insight, or even in the space between waking and dreaming. What you may not realize is that these experiences aren't random or merely subjective. They represent movements of your consciousness across territories that have been meticulously mapped by traditions worldwide. Whether you've known it or not, you've been traversing realms that ancient wisdom traditions have documented in astonishing detail. Tonight, I invite you to join me in exploring these sacred cartographies of consciousness maps, drawn not with ink and paper, but with symbols, metaphors, and direct mystical experience. Together, we'll discover how these maps can illuminate your own inner journey and reveal the common ground where all spiritual paths ultimately converge. Our expedition will take us across 4 major mapping systems of consciousness. We'll ascend the branches of the Kabbalistic tree of life, where 10 divine emanations create a blueprint of reality from the highest spiritual realms to our physical existence. We'll walk through the 6 realms of Buddhist cosmology, understanding how these aren't just afterlife destinations, but states of mind we experience daily. We'll journey through the upper, middle, and lower worlds of shamanic traditions, accessing different dimensions of reality through the axis mundi, the world tree that connects all planes of existence. And we'll explore the mental, physical, and spiritual planes of Hermetic wisdom, uncovering how, as above, so below, reveals the fractal nature of consciousness across all levels of reality. By the end of our journey, you'll possess not just knowledge of these systems, but a metamap, a unified understanding of consciousness that transcends any single tradition. This isn't mere theory, it's a practical framework for navigating your own expanded states of awareness. Long before modern psychology attempted to map the human psyche, ancient wisdom traditions recognized that consciousness extended far beyond our ordinary waking state. These traditions understood that reality is multi-layered, with consciousness operating across numerous dimensions simultaneously. In the mystical tradition of Kabbalah, which dates back thousands of years, the Tree of Life emerged as perhaps the most comprehensive map of consciousness ever devised. This sacred geometry reveals 10 sephirot, or emanation spheres of divine energy that flow from the infinite source down into manifest reality. Each sephira represents not just a cosmic principle, but a state of consciousness accessible to the human mind. You are the Tree of Life in human form, teaches modern Kabbalistic wisdom. a microcosmic reflection of the universe. To begin to realize this is to consciously inhibit your body and to live within awareness of non-duality. Meanwhile, across the Himalayan plateau, Buddhist sages were developing their own sophisticated cartography of consciousness through the six realms model. This wasn't merely a cosmological map, but a profound psychological system describing the various states of mind humans experience, from the blissful God realms to the tormented hell realms. As Mingyur Rinpoche explains, in Tibetan Buddhism, we map out 6 realms to investigate the main mental afflictions that bind us to samsara. The 6 realms of samsaric existence are divided into the 3 lower and 3 higher realms. In indigenous cultures worldwide, shamanic practitioners developed the 3 worlds model: upper, middle, and lower, accessed through altered states of consciousness. These weren't mere mythological constructs, but experiential realms entered through disciplined spiritual practice. And in the Western esoteric tradition, Hermetic philosophy offered yet another map. In Hermeticism, there are 3 great planes: the mental plane, physical plane, and spiritual plane, which have varying lesser planes between them that also differ in degree between undifferentiated matter and spirit. The first profound revelation that emerges from studying these various maps is that they're not describing different territories, but rather the same inner landscape, viewed through different cultural and symbolic lenses. Consider how the Kabbalistic tree of life divides reality into 4 worlds: Atziluth, divine emanation; Baraya, creation; Yetzirah, formation; and Asaya, action or manifestation. This bears striking similarity to the Hermetic conception of planes of consciousness described as layers of concentric circles, where the inner layers are more foundational and influence the outer layers. When we examine the Buddhist 6 realms, gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings, we find they correspond remarkably well to psychological states identified in other traditions. The realm of gods, characterized by pleasure, wealth, and power, but lacking compassion, mirrors what Hermetic teachings call the plane of human consciousness in its higher aspects. The Rosicrucian tradition, closely related to Hermetic wisdom, describes how, on these 3 higher planes of consciousness, the individual soul manifests self-consciousness, or the consciousness of I am, in at least a certain degree. While on the lower 4 planes, this consciousness of I is entirely absent, and the mental activity is more or less automatic and instinctive. This corresponds with the Buddhist division between the 3 higher realms, good, fortunate, of gods, demigods, and humans, versus the 3 lower realms, evil, unfortunate, of animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings. What emerges is a stunning recognition. Across traditions, sages identified similar structures of consciousness, only differing in how they articulated and symbolized these experiences. But the metacartography of consciousness reveals even deeper mysteries when we examine the transitions between these states or realms. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, consciousness moves along 22 pathways connecting the 10 Sephirot, each associated with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. These pathways represent states of transition, the movement of consciousness between stable points represented by the Sephirot. Similarly, in Buddhist cosmology, consciousness transitions between realms based on karma patterns of thought, emotion, and action that generate momentum towards certain states of awareness. The first 3 paths are known as the 3 benevolent destinies, Kusalagati, where beings experience varying degrees of virtue, pleasure, and pain. The last 3 paths are referred to as the 3 unbenevolent destinies, Akusalagati, where beings lack virtue and suffer predominantly. A fascinating parallel emerges in the shamanic three worlds model, where consciousness journeys along an axis mundi, often visualized as a world tree or cosmic pillar to access different realms of reality. This mirrors the Kabbalistic concept of the tree of life as both macrocosmic, universal, and microcosmic within the human being. The Hermetic tradition speaks of planes interpenetrating themselves and the physical planet in which we live, the solar systems, and all the physical structures of the universe. This interpenetration of planes culminates in the universe itself as a physically structured, dynamic, and evolutive expression. Here we encounter a profound paradox. These maps suggest that consciousness simultaneously exists at all levels, yet our ordinary awareness identifies with only one level at a time. We are, in essence, multidimensional beings experiencing a focused slice of our total existence. As David Smith explains in his work on esoteric cartography, a metacartography is the highest category of esoteric cartography, which is a type of sacred image unaffiliated with either organized religion or secular culture. The cartographer gives their entire life over to the process to become an open channel for the sublime mystery at the heart of all things. But how do we practically apply this metamap of consciousness in our daily lives? How do we navigate these realms with intention rather than being unconsciously pulled between them? First, recognition is essential. By understanding the architecture of consciousness described across traditions, we can better identify which realm or plane we're experiencing at any given moment. When you notice yourself consumed by sensory pleasures without compassion for others, recognize this as the God realm of Buddhism or the higher aspects of what Hermetic traditions call the plane of human consciousness. When you feel trapped in repetitive patterns of fear and aggression, this corresponds to the hell realms in Buddhism or the lower aspects of the Hermetic plane of human consciousness. The Kabbalistic tree of life offers practical insight into our psychological movements. The three pillars, severity, left, equilibrium, middle, and mercy, right, represent fundamental energetic tendencies in consciousness. When we're rigid and judgmental, we've moved into the pillar of severity. When we're excessively permissive, we've swung to the pillar of mercy. Wisdom lies in finding the middle pillar of balance. Shamanic wisdom teaches us that accessing the upper world brings connection with divine guidance, while journeys to the lower world connect us with primal power and ancestral wisdom. The middle world, both ordinary and non-ordinary, is where we integrate these insights into everyday life. As the Northern School of Esoteric Wisdom teaches, it's important to find someone who has already achieved a degree of success using these tools and accomplishing the results that you are focused on achieving. We need guides who have traversed these territories before us. Practical methods for navigating these maps include meditation to stabilize awareness and observe transitions between states, ritual, and symbolic work to consciously engage with specific levels. Shadow work to transform lower realm experiences. Contemplation of sacred texts that describe these territories. Community practice with others, exploring similar maps from the vantage point where all these maps converge. A transcendent perspective emerges, one that reveals the ultimate purpose of these cartographies of consciousness. These maps aren't merely describing what is, but pointing toward what could be. They chart not only the territory of consciousness as it commonly manifests, but also the extraordinary possibilities of human awareness when fully developed. In Kabbalah, the entire tree of life exists within each person, yet most live primarily identified with Malkuth, the physical realm. The spiritual journey involves awakening to progressively higher Sephirot, ultimately realizing connection with Keter the crown, representing pure divine consciousness. Buddhism similarly teaches that while we cycle through the six realms, The potential for liberation of Buddha nature exists within beings of all realms. The ultimate goal isn't to permanently inhabit the God realms, but to transcend the wheel of samsara altogether through enlightenment. As the Rosicrucian teachings explain, beyond all the planes of consciousness, existing the highest plane of all, the plane of the gods, to which all the rest is as but a faint shadow of the reality. This convergence of traditions points to a profound truth. The purpose of mapping consciousness isn't merely to understand where we are, but to illuminate where we can go to show that states of consciousness considered extraordinary or mystical are actually our birthright. The metamap reveals that spiritual evolution isn't about leaving behind the lower aspects of consciousness, but integrating all levels into a coherent whole. Just as the Kabbalistic tree represents a unified system where divine light flows through all Sephirot, our journey involves bringing awareness to all aspects of our being. As explorers of consciousness have discovered across centuries and cultures, these maps ultimately point beyond themselves to the mapmaker pure awareness itself, which transcends all categories, yet gives rise to them all. Soul Traveler, as our journey through the cartographies of consciousness comes to a close, I invite you to recognize that you stand at the threshold of worlds within worlds. Within worlds, territories of mind and spirit that await your conscious exploration. The ancient wisdom traditions have gifted us these maps, not as abstract philosophical systems, but as practical guides for the greatest adventure possible. The journey into the fullness of your own consciousness. Remember that these maps, while profound, are not the territory itself. They are fingers pointing to the moon, not the moon itself. The territory can only be known through direct experience, through your own conscious exploration of these inner realms. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, notice the transitions of consciousness. As you meditate tomorrow, observe the qualities of awareness that arise. In your interactions with others, recognize which realm or plane is operating in each moment. The mystic poet Rumi once wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." This is the ultimate revelation of all esoteric cartography, that the macrocosm exists within the microcosm, that the entire map of consciousness lives within you. I invite you to continue this journey beyond our time together today, to study these traditions more deeply, to practice the techniques they offer for shifting consciousness intentionally, and to create your own living map based on direct experience. For in the end, you are not merely the explorer of these territories. You are the territory itself, consciousness mapping its own infinite nature. And that, dear viewer, is the greatest mystery and the greatest revelation of all. Until we meet again on the journey beyond the veil, I am your fellow traveler in consciousness.